Hello everyone, this is Advocate Tisha Mitruka and I'm going to take a class on election laws. Election laws is a part of your constitutional laws per se, but also when you dig deeper, it has a lot to do with different other acts and it's a very important part of your understanding in the perspective of your CLAT examination and also your future and your social science purpose. So it covers everything, and most of you must be aware of how it works, but we'll see and we'll understand more in terms of the legal perspective today. So, can you tell me what do you mean by election? If you can comment your opinion and thoughts in the comment box below. But meanwhile, let's move ahead with our today's presentation and today's class on election laws. So we'll learn about election process, we'll learn about election commission and constitutional provisions as well, along with a few different other things that I will teach you about. Let's start with our introduction towards election law in India. So when we are talking about election law, what are we talking about? We're talking about essentially choosing the party or the person who will be ruling us, right? It's a very layman's term, in a very childlike term. But when you talk about it in a proper manner or in a legal way, then you say that the election law governs the conduct of elections at national and state levels, which means that when you're talking about elections that are being held and the laws that govern those elections, you're talking about what is the regulation or the framework that is dealing with this process. What is the framework that is dealing with how people choose the ruling party, how they come into power, when they come into power, what happens, how can they be removed, and what powers do they have. These are only few areas that it covers that I'm talking about, but there are also other areas as well. It's kind of a huge area that you can eventually take a lot of interest in and progress in your future. But for now, for your CLAT understanding, let's talk about in brief. So we'll also, election law is also very important because it ensures free, fair and democratic elections. Now, imagine a country which has elections regularly, but there is no body, there is no law to regulate it, to govern it, to look into it. If any, misuse of elections are being are being held. If multiple parties are at war with each other, which they usually are, but they are not able to come at peace. Nobody is there to say that this party was wrong, that is why they should be disqualified, or that they have violated such laws, which is why they should not come to a power so that they can mistreat people and also lead our democracy to a ruin. So now that we have seen what will be the condition when election laws are not there, we understand why it is so important in any country. And every country has such laws, but for your understanding, for your syllabus, election laws from an Indian perspective is all that you need to know. So this is the key purpose of election laws, and there are different key laws that you need to understand. You need to at least keep in mind, if not learn. That is Representation of the People Act 1950 and Representation of the People Act 1951. It will be in the upcoming slides. I will talk to it, or I'll refer it as RPA. So you must know that I'm talking about Representation of People Act 1950 and 1951, right? So I hope this concept is clear. Now we can move ahead with a deeper understanding of what election law is and how it works, the process, the procedure, so on. Now, when we are talking about election laws or any laws thereof, you know that our Constitution of India is so important and it is so vast and wide that it covers every law under it. It might not be as detailed as the acts because an act is specific to that area, but it is an umbrella law that covers everything. And it is the ultimate guidebook when it comes to legal students or aspiring law students, right? So here we'll refer to these articles specifically from Article 324 till 329, which tell us how election laws should be regulated, or rather it describes the manner that election laws work in India. The first one being Article 324, establishment. It talks about establishment and powers of the Election Commission of India. Now we'll talk about Election Commission of India in detail in the next slide, but ECI is a very important body. Election Commission of India is the commission which is responsible for regulating and governing the election process in India. Article, so how this comes into place and what are the powers? It is mentioned under Article 324. Next article which is important is Article 325, which talks about universal adult suffrage, which means that there should be no discrimination in electoral rolls. Essentially, it's saying that while the voters are voting, it should not be, there should be no discrimination in terms of gender, in terms of, the color of the skin, religion, nothing. These discriminatory grounds are not relevant when it comes to voting, because every citizen of India has a right to vote. There are a few exceptions to this, but then you can look into it later, and it's not that important right now for you to know. If you are interested, you can comment, you can find it out, do your research, and then comment in the comment box. So Article 325 deals with no discrimination in electoral rolls, and this is termed as universal adult suffrage. Article 326 deals with election based on adult suffrage. Don't confuse it. Now, what do you mean by adult suffrage? It means that when you are 18 years or above, then you are eligible for voting. Now, if you have turned 18 already, then you should get your voter IDs, and then you can go ahead and make your vote, cast your vote, and it's an important right. But remember, it's also important to know that casting a vote is ultimately choosing your governing body. So you can also, there's also an option to reject all the candidates. So in a way, not casting your vote is also a right. Tell me what you think about it. Now, Article 327 deals with Parliament's power to make laws regarding elections. We know that Election Commission of India has the power, right? But ultimately, Parliament also gets a few set of powers to make laws regarding elections. The Election Commission of India is not the sole body. Parliament has the right to make laws. Rules can be made by Election Commission of India, but laws by the Parliament. Now, Article 328, this talks about state legislatures' powers on elections, subject to 327. Now, this and this are in relation with each other. So, keeping this in mind and not overstepping it, state legislature has also power to make laws on elections. And lastly, Article 329, here, judicial review is barred in matters of electoral rolls and elections except via election petitions. Now, what does this mean? Judicial review. You must have read in papers also here and there. Judicial review means that in case of a misuse or in any dispute or in any issue that is ongoing, the courts will have the power to review the matter, right? There should be a judicial review on it. So, here the judicial review is barred in matters of electoral rules and elections except via election petitions. So, there it's saying that there should be a proper procedure. When there is an election petition filed, only then judicial review is allowed. So, Article 329 talks about that. Moving on, we'll be talking about Election Commission of India. Like I promised, we'll talk more about it in the next slide. Let's delve into the history of it. Now, Election Commission of India is a permanent body. It's a very vital body when we're talking about election. It's synonym with elections and Election Commission of India. ECI is a constitutional body. It's a permanent constitutional body under Article 324. This is something you can memorize. Article 324, under this it was established, right? Now, the ECI was established in accordance with the Constitution on 25th January 1950. This is the date, 25th January 1950. Why? You might be curious to know why am I asking you to memorize it or at least put a more focus on these specific points. It's because even if some questions don't come in legal reasoning, it can be very important for your GK and current affairs. So things like that, they might be posed as a question for you in a different subject. So that is why you need to know your facts, especially legal facts. Now, ECI was established in accordance with the Constitution, of course, on 25th January 1950. And the composition, this is the most important point, it is that the composition was one Chief Election Commissioner. It is the Chief Election Commissioner, which is CEC. And two election commissioners. It is a Chief Election Commissioner and two election commissioners were subordinate to the Chief Election Commissioner are present. Before this, it was a different structure. From October to 1993, this is the composition of the Election Commission of India. So I hope you have understood how the body was formed and how what is its composition, right? Let's move on to our next slide, which talks about the appointment and the tenure of the Chief Election Commissioner in the ECI. Now the President of India, he or she is the one who appoints the CEC and the election commissioners. They have tenure of over 6 years, 6 years or up to the age of 65, whichever is earlier. For example, the Chief Election Commissioner or the election commissioners, they have reached the age of 65 before their 6th year is over. Then they will be, their term will be considered to be over then only, because it is the age that has come before their term of appointment. So, either 6 years or the age of 65 years, whichever is earlier, they will be having a tenure of that many years. Now, they enjoy the same status and service conditions as are enjoyed by the judges of Supreme Court of India. The same status and the same service conditions which are given to the Supreme Court judges, it's given to the ECs and the CEC. Their post is so important that you can, imagine when I say that the judges and they are given the same services and the statuses, right? Now, the third point being the Chief Election Commissioner can be removed from office only through impeachment. In other posts, there might be a different procedure or different condition requirements for removal of the post holder. But in this case, the Chief Election Commissioner can only be removed through impeachment. So that is very important. Now we'll delve into the powers and the functions of the ECI. ECI conducts elections, that we already know. I told you in the first half itself that ECI is so important. What it does is it governs the elections that happen all over the nation. So it is the body that is responsible for governing the elections, for conducting the elections. So first will be conducting the elections. And then when the elections are going on, how it is going on, are any laws violated? If so, what are the consequences? So these things come under the purview of ECI. Conducting elections of Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, state assemblies, the president and the vice president. So all the elections. So these are the names of the elections that are held and where the ECI is a part of. Now it also prepares electoral rolls, it monitors code of conduct, registers parties, allots symbols and acts as a quasi-judicial body during disputes. So what it does is, it prepares a list of voters and then it allots symbols to the parties. It monitors the code of conduct, which is again, it means that the code of conduct by the parties is not violated, that they are acting within the norms and the laws that are in place, and then they are behaving ethically, and also it registers the parties and then allots the symbols. In case of any disputes between one or two or more parties or the candidates, then there's it acts as a quasi judicial body during such disputes, right? So this is how it functions, and these are the powers it has when it comes to elections. Now let's move on to election process of in India, how the election process is conducted. Now when we'll go through it step by step. So the first one is delimitation of constituencies. What does this mean? Delimitation of constituencies. It means that the redrawing of boundaries take place. It is essentially redrawing the boundaries of electoral constituencies in the constituencies where election is performed. Basically, different constituencies are there, right? There are different boundaries of each constituency. So that those boundaries need to be clear, they need to be distinct. So redrawing those boundaries is essential in order to ensure a balanced representation based on population. Now, this is very important because the population's, census, the data of the population is taken accurately, and based on that, proportionally, the constituencies are divided. And hence, this is the first process in the election process in India. The second one being preparation of electoral rolls, which means a list of eligible voters, or rather a list of people, citizens of India who are eligible for voting are compiled, and they are, this preparation is made in order to keep keep track of how many votes should be should be cast in the present electoral year. So this preparation is done, and this is done not just a nationwide census but also to keep track in each constituency how many votes were cast. The third step being announcement of the schedule. As soon as the delimitation and the preparation of electoral rolls are over, there's an announcement of the schedule, that is the official declaration of electoral dates. The election dates are officially announced by the ECI. This is again the job of the ECI. The fourth step being filing and scrutiny of nominations. So the nomination papers of each candidates, the groups, the parties, they should be filed. They should be filed accurately and within a set deadline, and they should be done in order to contest elections in the first place. Now, just applying and putting your papers in the form of an application form before ECI is not a guarantee that it will be accepted. There are certain criteria as well, but then this is the first step in contesting elections, in being able to contest elections as a candidate, right? Now, the fifth one will be withdrawal, campaigning and polling. Now, the candidates can voluntarily withdraw their names as well. Just like there is a time frame for applying your names in the list of candidates, similarly, there's also a time frame given so that after application, for any reason, the candidates can withdraw their names as well. So, but if not done so, then they'll move forward with the names. And the sixth one being counting and declaration of results. After all of these processes are done, the final one is counting the votes which are there for each candidate and then declaring the results of who is the winner of the specified election. So this is how a general election process in India works. I hope it's clear to you. Moving on. Now, this might seem a bit overwhelming to you guys, but it's rather simple, and I'm sure you might even know about a lot of these rules. I would not say rules, but facts about Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. First of all, before looking into this table, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to visualize what Rajya Sabha means, who are the past members, you might be able to even name some of them, and who are the members of Lok Sabha if you know, and how are they elected. Just a general layout. If you are not aware at all, if nothing comes to mind, don't worry. That is why we are learning about election laws right now. So that before your paper, you are very strong in this subject. So Lok Sabha, like the name suggests, it's for the people. It's a house of the people and for the people. Rajya Sabha, what does this mean? I've already told you about Lok Sabha. I hope you can tell me about what Rajya Sabha means. Let me know in the comments. Now, why am I talking about Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha is because they are very important part of election law. And ECI, along with the election of vice president and president, it also governs the elections of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Now, why it's very important is, I'll let you know. I'll tell you about it. I'm sure you guys know already because they form the parliament, right? Now, there are different bases for comparison between Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and the most important basis for comparison we will talk about. When it comes to definition, Lok Sabha is known as the lower house. It's L and this is also L, so you can just simplify your learning like that. Or house of people, like I told you. Rajya Sabha, it's the elected representatives of the assemblies of the states. Now here, elected representatives. It's composed of the representatives of the assemblies of states and the union territories indirectly. This is not done directly. But here, Lok Sabha, it's directly. In Rajya Sabha, they indirectly elect the delegates of the to the council of the states. Rajya Sabha is also called the council of the states. Council of the states, lower house, or the house of people. So these are the names that these houses are known by. But the more important part is that here the bills are passed and laws are made for the better governance of India. Here also it is passed, but there's some difference between Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Moving on, I'll tell you what the difference is. In constitutional provision, Article 81 deals with the composition of House of People, right? Specific article is there, Article 81. Whereas Article 80, which is the article before that, deals with composition of Council of States. Now you can repeat after me. Article 81 deals with composition of Lok Sabha and Article 80 deals with composition of Rajya Sabha. Tenure period. Here it's interesting to know that Rajya Sabha has no fixed tenure, right? But Lok Sabha has a tenure of 5 years. Election for membership. When it comes to this, the members of the Lok Sabha are elected through the voting process with the involvement of the common people. You can relate it to like this. It's house of people. That is why obviously people will be involved. Thus, they vote and they're directly involved in the election of the parties or rather people to Lok Sabha. But here in Rajya Sabha, I told you, right, it's indirect. So you have to keep that in mind. The members of Rajya Sabha are elected by representatives of state legislative assemblies of states and union territories. The state and union territories, their representatives. So here, legislative assemblies of both states and union territories, their representatives elect members of Rajya Sabha. Do you understand the hierarchy now? You can take a look. So here, if you don't understand this, you can just take a look here and you'll be able to understand. So here, state and union territories, the legislative assemblies, their representatives go ahead to elect people. So here there is no involvement or rather very indirect involvement of the people, right? Moving on, election principle. Universal adult franchise is applied to for the Lok Sabha election, whereas proportional representation by means of single transferable votes is applied. There is a vast difference between the two election process. Here, universal adult franchise, which means that if you are a citizen of India and you are above 18 years of age, you will be eligible to vote, right? But here, proportional representation by means of single transferable votes. Since it's very indirect, there's a different method altogether for representing or rather electing people to Rajya Sabha. This is all that you need to know for now. When you're talking about strength, there's a vast difference between the strength and the composition of people in these two houses. So in the Lok Sabha, the strength is from 500 to 552. It's a huge number. Presently, there are 543 seats. This is very important. You should memorize. 543 seats right now, but it can vary from 500 to 552 members. Whereas in Rajya Sabha, the strength varies from 200 to 250 on a daily basis, almost half of this. But currently, there are 245 seats. In Lok Sabha, it's 543 seats right now. In Rajya Sabha, it's 245 seats. Moving on, the minimum age that you can be elected to Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. For Lok Sabha, it's 25 years of age, and for Rajya Sabha, it's 30 years of age. Next point of difference is House representative. Who represents the House? Who brings the House in order? There has to be someone, right? In Lok Sabha, the business is conducted by Speaker of the Lok Sabha. Now, when I'm talking about the Speaker, I am sure you can tell me who's the current Speaker of the Lok Sabha. I am eager to find out if you have given me the correct answer in the comment box. But the Speaker, whoever the Speaker of the Lok Sabha is, they have great power. They not only conduct the parliamentary sessions, but they also have the right to stop any disputes. They have the right to maintain order. It's a responsibility and the right. And you might see in parliamentary sessions, you might see the recordings on the TV, right? Or the sessions on TV. I am sure if you don't, please go and look at it. It's very interesting and you'll be able to learn a lot from it. So whenever you do, you will be able to see that the discipline maintains and who is speaking first, if somebody is interrupting or not, how the matters are being conducted, what matters are being conducted, all the processes are regulated by the Speaker. So the Speaker is a very important integral part of Lok Sabha. So the business is conducted by the Speaker. But in Rajya Sabha, it's conducted by Vice President as the chairman of the Rajya Sabha. If you get a question that who is the chairman of the Rajya Sabha, it's our country's Vice President. So he or she conducts the business of Rajya Sabha. The next one being role of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Now, Lok Sabha has a greater role in legislation and it is responsible. It is the only house that has the power to pass a money bill, right? But Rajya Sabha does not have a power of passing money bill. Any bill apart from money bill can be passed or can be actually originated in Rajya Sabha, but in Lok Sabha, the origination of money bills is possible. Every other bill and money bill is possible. So that's a very important, crucial point of difference. Now, when we're talking about different elections, we've already learned about Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, but there's also the election of the president and the vice president that is very important. So when we're talking about president's election, the president is elected by the elected members of the Vidhan Sabha, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, which is the parliament and the elected members of the Vidhan Sabha for a period of 5 years. And this 5 years is like a tenure, it's a fixed tenure for any president, but it does not mean that the president cannot stand for re-election. A re-election is also possible. A specific formula is used to allocate votes so that there is a balance between the population of each state and the number of votes. So now to strike a balance between population of each state and the number of votes, there is a specific formula that is used. If this formula is not used, then it will be very, imbalanced and a correct determination will not be able to be made. So this, who does this formula, who regulates the formula and who declares the result? Again, it's the ECI. So ECI is the body responsible for all this process and the processes I've mentioned before as well. Assembly members from a state can cast and to give an equal balance between states in the National Assembly Parliament members. So why is the formula used? You can again give this paragraph a read. If no candidate receives a majority of votes, there's a possibility, right, that there's no majority of votes, both have received 50-50 votes. If there are two leading candidates and both have received 50-50 votes and there's no majority, then how will it be determined? What will happen is, there is a system by which losing candidates are eliminated from the contest and votes are transferred. Their votes are transferred to the candidates who are leading until one gains a majority. So there's a specific procedure for this as well. So the Election Commission is responsible for not only coming up or devising a formula for a proper counting of votes and declaring the results, but also be prepared for what happens in case of a no majority, what happens in case of there are not enough votes, anything. There has to be a rule, there has to be a conclusion. So for all of this process, Election Commission of India is the body responsible. Now we have learned about how a president a president's election is taking place in India. The vice president, on the other hand, is elected by a direct vote of all members, elected and nominated. It's not here only elected members in the president's election, but in vice president's election, all the members cast a direct vote, even if they are just nominated, and those who are elected of the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. So both houses of the parliament, all their members, elected and nominated members, will cast a direct vote in choosing the vice president. Now, in our previous slide, I talked about the key laws that are important for our election laws in India. Now, the first one being the RPA 1950. Here we can see the RPA was enacted to provide for allocation of seats in the House of People. Now, what is the House of People? You're right, it's Lok Sabha. And in the Legislative Assemblies and Legislative Council of States. Now, what is the Council of States? I'm sure you know, and you can answer that for yourself. Now, to sum up, here are different points. I'll give you some time to go through these points and absorb what is being said. Here, these points refer to what is the provision that is relating to the elections that are included in RPA. This does not give you a detailed breakdown, but only an overview of what the RPA represents and what the RPA includes, right? So, please give it a read and then ask me if you have any doubts or questions. I hope you were able to understand. It's allocation of seats in the House of People, how the allocation of seats take place, the delimitation that takes place, the process and everything. There are provisions related to election officers also, the chief electoral officers, the district election officers and other officers as well. There are provisions for electoral rules for parliamentary, assembly and council constituencies. The manner of filing seats. These provisions are also mentioned in the RPA 1950, along with the local authorities that are there for purpose of elections to the State Legislative Council. Lastly, how jurisdiction of civil courts are barred, or what are the other provisions that are to be kept in mind. Moving on, now this was the summary of RPA, but there is another act which is important. It's the RPA 1951. Now here, broadly speaking, this act contains provisions relating to the following electoral matters. Similarly, I urge you to pause the video for 2 minutes and look through these provisions, the headings of the provisions rather. It talks about qualification and disqualification of membership of parliamentary and state legislatures, notification of general elections, of when the general elections will be held, what are the rules that are to be abided by, the administrative machinery for conducting elections, how administrative bodies are responsible for the conducting of elections, how it will take place, all the technicalities and all the practical aspects and the administrative aspects have to be kept in mind while conducting elections. The registration of political parties, the procedure, like again I said, putting down your papers, providing all the documents, proof, then applying through the application forms, then withdrawing if needed, then all these things are governed by the ECI under RPA 1951. Then conduction of elections, free supply of certain material to candidates of recognized political parties. There's also disputes regarding elections, if any disputes arise. Corrupt practices and election offences. So there are different offences that are also in relation to election procedures, right? Whenever there is any process that happens in such a huge scale, it is to be expected that some violations will take place, but they cannot be overlooked. So how these offences should be taken care of, how they should be punished, All of those things are included in RPA 1951. Then powers of election commission in connection with inquiries as to disqualification, on what grounds the disqualification will take place, how it is empowered, re-elections and time limit for filling vacancies in case of any vacancy in a candidature, how it is to be refilled, right? Miscellaneous provisions relating to elections and barring the jurisdiction of civil courts. So these are very important provisions, and one might say the primary provisions that are important when it comes to election process. So that is why you need to keep this in mind. Moving on, there are other laws as well that regulate the elections in India. The first one being Delimitation Commission, and the Delimitation Act rather, how the boundaries are drawn of different constituencies, and to also consider latest census. So this redrawing of boundaries takes place only when the census is taken. The last census in 2001 was taken. According to that, the boundaries were drawn. It ensures equal representation and balanced population distribution. Now the election symbols reservation and allotment order, in purview of this act, it issued by the Election Commission under Article 34, it regulates the recognition of political parties and allotment of symbols. For example, can you tell me what is the symbol of Bharatiya Janata Party? Of Congress? Of your local bodies in each state? Can you tell me? Yeah, you can list it down in the comments, and they are rather interesting. Representation of the People Amendment Act 2003. This amendment introduced electronic voting machines. This is another development, or rather a very significant development when it comes to elections or the mode of elections. It's held through EVMs for voting in elections. It makes it very easy and efficient for voters. Conduct of Elections Rules 1961. These rules provide detailed guidelines for conduction of elections, including provisions for nomination process, scrutiny of papers, election symbols, model code of conduct, and expenditure limits for candidates and parties, right? So conduct of election rules essentially talks about how the election takes place, what are the rules they have to abide by, and these are the specific areas where what it talks about under this act. The last one, Representation of the People Amendment Act 2010. Now the RPA 2010 talks about the nota provision or the option in the electronic voting machines. Now I've told you, right, a voter, a citizen has also the right of casting or denying its vote to any candidates. If you go to cast your vote and you do not like any candidate who have stood up for contesting elections, then you also have the option of none of the above vote. You can just click on it, so that it is providing you transparency, but at the same time it's providing you a sense of power that you do not like any of the contestants and you would rather not vote for any of them, because a vote wrongly cast is worse than not casting a vote to the candidate you don't like. So what it does is, if nota option is utilized by a lot of people, it gives the ECI a fair evaluation of how the candidates are, of how to improve, how the candidates should improve, everything. So this data is very essential for our democracy. It's not always important that all the candidates, the voters, will agree with. So this is how the other laws regulating elections in India are important and are listed. Moving on, there are certain provisions for disqualifications, or other grounds for disqualifications in elections. The first one being bribery. There's also, if a candidate is taken bribery or has offered bribery for some work with regard to elections, that's a very clear-cut ground for disqualification. This undue influence that has been used, the political power has been used, any power which has been misused, if that is done, then there's disqualification. Conviction. If the contestant suffers any conviction in a court of law, then automatically their membership or their candidature will be pulled back. It will be thrown out. Non-submission of expenses. If the expenses by the party is not being submitted, then also it can be a major ground for disqualification. And lastly, holding office of profit, insolvency and unsound mind. If the candidate is of unsound mind or insolvent and or holds a different office of profit, any office of profit, a personal office of profit cannot be held by a person who is standing up for elections. So these are the grounds for disqualifications in elections. Moving on, this is a sample CLAT paper, a sample CLAT MCQ. Which of the following does not constitute a ground for disqualification under the Constitution of India? Whether it's unsound mind, yes, it qualifies. Undischarged insolvent, it qualifies. Resignation, no. Acquiring of foreign citizenship, yes, it qualifies because you have to be an Indian citizen. This is a given. So the correct answer will be resignation from parliament. If you're resigning from parliament, then it constitutes a ground for, it does not constitute a ground for disqualification. You know, a sense of power that you do not like any of the contestants and you would rather not vote for any of them. Because a vote wrongly cast is worse than not casting a vote to the candidate you don't like. So what it does is, if nota option is utilized by a lot of people, it gives the ECI a fair evaluation of how the candidates are, of how to improve, how the candidates should improve, everything. So this data is very essential for our democracy. It's not always important that all the candidates, the voters will agree with. So this is how the other laws regulating elections in India are important and are listed. Moving on, there are certain provisions for disqualifications or other grounds for disqualifications in elections. The first one being bribery. There's also if if a candidate is taken bribery or has offered bribery for some work with regard to elections, that's a very clear-cut ground for disqualification. This undue influence that has been used, the political power has been used, any power which has been misused. If that is done, then there's disqualification. Conviction. If the contestant suffers any conviction in a court of law, then automatically their membership or their candidature will be pulled back. It will be thrown out. Non-submission of expenses. If the expenses by the party is not being submitted, then also it can be a major ground for disqualification. And lastly, holding office of profit, insolvency and unsound mind. If the candidate is of unsound mind or insolvent and or holds a different office of profit, any office of profit, a personal office of profit cannot be held by a person who is standing up for elections. So these are the grounds for disqualifications in elections. Moving on, this is a sample CLAT paper, a sample CLAT MCQ. Which of the following does not constitute a ground for disqualification under the Constitution of India? Whether it's unsound mind, yes, it qualifies. Undischarged insolvent, it qualifies. Resignation, no. Acquiring of foreign citizenship, yes, it qualifies because you have to be an Indian citizen. This is a given. So the correct answer will be resignation from parliament. If you're resigning from parliament, then it constitutes a ground for, it does not constitute a ground for disqualification. So now we'll be talking about something very important, which is the Model Code of Conduct. I mentioned it in the previous slides as well. So the MCC, which is the Model Code of Conduct, is very important. It's a set of guidelines issued by the Election Commission of India to regulate what it is, the purpose of Model Code of Conduct. It's to regulate political parties and candidates before elections. So this is done before elections to ensure a free and fair elections. So because the election procedure should run smoothly, right? The functioning should be smooth, it should be free from any obstacles. That is why the MCC is set into place and it is monitored very closely so that all the parties adhere to all the laws and the rules, and especially the Model Code of Conduct that it is expected to follow. Now here it is important to know it's not a law, it's a moral or an ethical code. But violations can lead to legal consequences as well. It's not important for it to be a law to lead for legal consequences. But similarly here it's an ethical code or a moral code. So violations can, come under RPA 1951 or IPC as well. Right now it's not IPC, but yeah, RPA 1951, it can regulate it. So applicability of MCC. Now, MCC comes into force from the date the election schedule is announced. From the very date the election schedule is announced till the date elections are over, it is applicable. So till the completion of the election process. Now, purpose of MCC is to ensure level playing field for all political parties. Now, there is no different rules or this moral or ethical codes for different parties or different candidates. It's the same level playing field. If any one of those, any party or any candidates violate these rules, it's the same. They will be subjected to the same legal consequences. And to avoid misuse of government machinery. Now, when elections are being held, it's a use of a government machinery, right? It is a government, very large scale national process that takes place. So, if any violations take place, it is directly proportional to violating or misusing government machinery. It prevents corrupt practices, intimidation, and hate speech. So, these things are also something that are not allowed when you are talking about model code of conduct. These are the purpose of MCC. Now, the consequences of MCC violation. It can include from warnings, censure by ECI, to filing of FIRs for serious offences. If there's something that is very small, it's not that consequential, then the party can be, or the candidate can be let off with a mere warning or a censure. But if it's more grave and serious, then FIRs can be filed. That is, first information report can be filed. A disqualification in even more severe cases, disqualification can be, subjected to the party involved. And this happened mainly in cases of corrupt practices. So wherever there is corruption involved, disqualification usually is the consequence. There can also be a ban on campaigning for specific individuals or parties. A ban can also be levied for some time for campaigning on specific parties or individuals. So these are the rules and rather facts about MCC. Moving on, there are some recent reforms that have come into place and issues as well that have been, addressed over time. As we are developing with each day, the country is also developing, and so the process of elections should also develop, right? New things also should come into place. Let's look at how election process has developed over years and what are the main things, important points to be remembered. The first one being VVPAT. So it is voter verified paper audit trail. What does this mean? It means that a device connected to an electronic voting machine, the EVM, it prints a paper slip. Now what is this? If you cast a vote, it will, the machine, the EVM will, it will let out, it will discharge a paper slip. In that paper slip, it will show the symbol and the name of the candidate for which you voted for. If you voted for party A, when you vote for it, there will be a paper that will come out of the EVM and it will show that you have cast your vote for party A. It will let you know. So there's transparency so that you are aware that a wrong vote has not been cast. So there's no confusion, right? So it's very simple and very important. So in order to verify voters' choices and ensure transparency. Number 2, one nation, one election. So this is a proposed, it's a proposal to hold simultaneous elections for Lok Sabha, state assemblies, municipalities and panchayats. Right now there are different elections, different procedures held for these elections, but there's a proposal to do this in one go itself. So in order to make it very organized and to make it very easy to understand for different people and to not use the resources this extensively. But this is still under review, so let's see what happens in the future. Electoral bonds. Financial instruments to fund political parties, that is anonymous donations via banking channels. This is also a new development in the election process, that some financial instrument and the financial funding of the political parties is being done through the donations which can be anonymous. These donations are anonymous via banking channels, right? This was not there before. Now, decriminalization of politics, social media influence. This is also that something coming up. Social media plays a very important role. So, decriminalization of politics and social media, a lot of use of social media is also being used, but it's very important to know and to limit the use of social media because it can be very dangerous if overstepped. Electoral rolls management system. Now, electoral rolls management system, or ERMS, is a digital centralized system used by the Election Commission of India for creating, updating, managing and publishing the electoral rolls of Indian citizens across all constituencies. So it keeps in mind the constituencies of the whole of India, and what it does, it creates a centralized system for creating, updating, managing and publishing the electoral rolls on a national level. What does election expenditure monitoring mean? Now, this means that it's a system set up by ECI again to track and control the money spent. It's very important, right? If there's a funding, if there are expenses given by the ECI or any other parties, so how that money is being spent, what are the expenditure that is incurred. So these things, there's a report that has to be given and by the candidates and the political parties during elections. So this system keeps help track of that. Now we'll move on to some very crucial landmark judgments in the field of election law. The first one being, and they are all Supreme Court judgments, very important ones. So let's have a look at that. Yeah. So when we are talking about the landmark cases in relation to election laws, the first one that comes to mind is the PUCL versus Union of India. Right? So this, what it talks about is the importance of right to know. So what does this mean? In this case, it was held that the voters, the citizens of India who cast a vote to the candidates have a right to know about the background, the assets, the qualifications of their candidates. So it is the right of every voter to know the background of the voters, the candidates that are contesting elections. So this is not just a general background, but also their assets, their criminal history, everything. So these things are very essential in order to make a very calculated, decision and voting for the right person, according to the voters' opinion. Now moving on, Lily Thomas versus Union of India. The Lily Thomas case is a 2013 case where the conviction disqualification was held. Essentially, it was held by the Supreme Court that whenever there is a conviction of a candidate, it automatically leads to a disqualification from the election as well. So but this is not just for a 6-month conviction. For example, any conviction of 2 years or more, if there's any offense that has been committed by a candidate which results in a conviction of 2 years or more, in that case the election will stand null, which is to say that the candidate will be cast out of the election and they will not be allowed to do so to participate anymore, right? So that disqualification is done in order to provide a better status, a better contesting ground for the voters in order to ensure that no wrong choices are made. A conviction directly results in disqualification from the election process. Now, PUCL versus Union of India, which is also, in order to avoid confusion, Nota case. Nota is none of the above, right? I've told you what it means in the previous slide. If you don't remember, please go back and refer to it. Here in the Nota case, what happened was, there is a conflict. On one hand, there was right to speech and expression, which is under Article 19. And on the other hand, there was that, the right to vote and the essential and rather the importance of voting, right? So some people said that there is a right to vote and people should exercise it and one of the candidates should be getting their vote. But at the same time, there is a group of people who also stated that it is under their right of speech and expression to not cast their vote as well, right? So in this case, the Supreme Court, after much deliberation, after much thought, they came to a judgment that there should be a specific option for not casting votes to any of the candidates, because it's the right to not cast a vote is as important as right to casting a vote. So it should be up to a person to give up their right by choosing the nota, which is not essentially giving up their right, but it means that all the candidates the voter was not satisfied with. So they in turn opted for the nota option. So these three landmark cases, they provided some new grounds for elections in India. They provided some new rules and new set of guidelines and also rights for voters and the candidates both. Moving on, who appoints the Chief Election Commissioner of India? Can you tell me? It's a very simple question. We have dealt with this question in the past when we were reading about the appointment of president as well. There it is. It's B. The president is responsible for appointment of Chief Election Commissioner of India. Now, what we can do is we can move on with the question and answer round, right? So we will deal with a number of passages and then you can give me the answer for those as well. Before that, can you give me one sample based passage question? The Election Commission ensures democratic elections but faces challenges like regulating finances and criminal elements. What do you think is the one limitation faced by the ECI? It's there in the question itself, regulating finances and criminal elements. So challenges in financial regularities. This is the answer. That is why you should read the passage very carefully. Now there are certain, before going forward with our questions and CLAT pattern questions based on election law, you should remember these important tips for your CLAT paper, which is focusing on these articles. I've already taught you these articles in the second slide itself. Then learning RPA 1950 1951 provisions. Now you don't need to learn per se, but you need to give more focus on them because these two are very important. Then following SC judgments, which is the Supreme Court judgments and current affairs. I told you, not just the judgments, but also current affairs. It can come in the form of current affairs. That is why you need to be aware of these things, right? The election process and the rules. And practicing legal reasoning based MCQs. This will strengthen your knowledge, your concepts as well. In turn, you'll be able to answer very efficiently. Now, let's move on to our question and answer session so that we will be able to be very confident when there's a CLAT paper in front of us, right? Now, let's move on and start a very important and a practical part of our session today, which relates to the question and answer round. But it is in the CLAT format, of course, otherwise it's of no use. You need to do your self-preparation, your strategy preparation according to the realities of the examination. That is why I present these questions in front of you so that you are very well equipped when it comes in front of you. Exactly like this. The question might be different, the passage might be different, but it's very important for you to practice in the same manner, right? Now, the first passage, hide and seek on the ECI and election process. Please give it a very careful read. If you don't understand anything, you can ask me in the comment and I will answer your questions. So, please read this passage and tell me what is the essence of this passage. This is only the first part of the passage. There's a different, there's a next slide also, that's a continuation. This is the second part. You can pause and give this a read. Now, these passages talk about CCTV footages, right? It talks about the integrity of election process and how there are growing concerns surrounding it. There are different things that are very important to notice here, like the conduct of election rules, right? And how ECI has the power to share all the documents related and how it was directed to do so by the Haryana High Court, Punjab and Haryana High Court. And this is basically a very critical passage, right? You should also, whenever you're talking about and whenever you're reading a passage, just note its tone, how the passage is being narrated to you. What does it feel like? Is it optimistic? Is it pessimistic? Is it critical? Is it just positive? What is it? So here, let's deal with our first question. If you have read the paragraph carefully, what is the primary concern raised in the passage regarding Election Commission of India? Can you tell me what's the answer? Let's start. The lack of strong privacy laws protecting your voter identity. No, I don't think that's a fair answer. In this question, the inability of the government to conduct free and fair elections. No. The inefficiency of electronic voting machines. No. But number A is the correct answer. The ECI's lack of transparency in sharing election related data. The fact that ECI was directed by the Punjab and Haryana High Court, right? It was directed to show its papers. But that directly implies that there was a lack of transparency in sharing election related data. You can confirm your answer by going back to the passage and reading it more carefully. The second question, the passage suggests that restricting public access to election records may result in, what do you think the answer is? You're right, it's increased suspicion regarding the credibility of elections. Again, see, there was a lack of transparency and then there's a restriction in public access. It is regarding the credibility of elections. So there's an increased suspicion. Now this increased suspicion was mentioned in the passage, and it suggests that restricting public access to election records will be the consequence of this, right? Because there is no transparency, or rather there is a very shortage of transparency in the ECI's actions. It might result in increased suspicion by the citizens that the elections are not being held properly and there is no truth in the procedure. So this is the correct answer. Question 3 is, according to the passage, what was the justification given by ECI for not sharing CCTV footage of polling booths? In questions like this might be a little twisted as well, but in these questions, these are very scoring questions. Why? Because these are very factual based in reference to the passage. You just need to go to the passage, point out locate the bit where it talks about the exact thing and then tick on your answer. So these are very scoring questions. Do not miss out or do not make mistakes on these. So here the answer is privacy and security concerns. This was the reason, that was justification given by the ECI for not sharing the CCTV footage of polling booths. Moving on to the next question. What inconsistency does the passage highlight regarding the ECI's handling of election records? What is the highlight in this? The highlight is the candidates have access to election records but the public does not, right? It's again showing there is no credibility, there's lack of transparency, thus candidates have an access but the public does not. So there is an inconsistency that is prevailing. The rest are wrong options. If you have answered them in either of these options, then they are wrong. You need to go and revisit the passage. The fifth question is, which of the following legal principles is most relevant to the issues raised in the passage? Think about it. Is it right to equality? Is it right to freedom of speech and expression? Or right to information versus right to privacy? Or protection of electoral democracy? Now, there are a lot of options which might confuse you. Each of the options might seem correct to you, and in a way it might be. But according to the passage, what is the main thing? The main part is right to information versus right to privacy. The main crux of this passage was, if the information about the election records was given to everyone, to the public as well, not just the candidates, which pertains to right to information, and right to privacy is the argument and the justification given by the ECI. So the previous two questions have given you the answer for this question. So sometimes questions are also posed by this. Do not solve the questions and forget about it. The next question might be related to that as well, right? It will save a lot of your time and energy. The sixth question, the passage suggests that concerns regarding EVM tampering are, in the passage, there was some talk about concerns regarding EVM tampering. What do you think the answer is? What was the concern? It was based on misinformation and the primary issue, and not the primary issue basically. It was about the misinformation that was given, right? Now, dealing with the last set of questions in this passage itself. What was the immediate trigger for government's amendment to the conduct of election rules? What was the trigger for the government's amendments to the conduct? The trigger was the High Court ruling allowing access to election records and CCTV footage. Which was the High Court that allowed? Go to the passage and read about it. It's Punjab and Haryana High Court, right? Which of the following best describes the author's tone in the passage? I told you to always take note of what is the tone of the passage, tone of narration. In this case, it was critical of the lack of transparency, right? We mentioned it also, we talked about it, that is critical in nature. It's not neutral and objective in any way. It's not supportive of the government stance, and it is definitely not optimistic. The correct answer is critical of the lack of transparency. Next question, which of the following assumptions can be made from the passage? Do you think any one of these are the correct answer? If yes, which one? The correct answer is transparency in the electoral process strengthens democratic institutions. Now, how did we come to this conclusion that A is the correct option? It's because the whole passage was talking about transparency in the first place, or the lack thereof. So that is why its Supreme Court is likely to overturn the ECI amendments is not something that we thought about as an assumption. It might be a fact, but not an assumption. The government has never allowed access to election records, again, not an assumption per se. And the voter suppression is a growing concern. Might be a growing concern, might be an important point, but not in relation to this passage. In relation to this passage and the definition of the word assumption, which is the question that we were asked, we will tick on option A. Always remember that. Now, the last question in this passage was, which of the following statements is not supported by the passage? Not supported. Please do not get confused and read the question carefully. Otherwise, if you don't read this, you might totally choose the exact opposite answer of what you were supposed to choose. So, here the answer would be, the Supreme Court has held that the ECI's amendments violate constitutional rights. Correct? So, let's move on to the second paragraph. Now, we'll not deal with the second paragraph as of yet, but we'll refer to the same passage and answer this set 2 questions. Right? The first question, in the phrase less secrecy and more transparency must be the way forward, what does secrecy imply in this context? It is also providing a reference to the passage, so that if you do remember the tone of the passage or the theme of the passage, you don't need to go back, you can just refer to this line, less secrecy and more transparency. What do you think secrecy implies? Here the answer is the ECI's decision to withhold crucial election data, right? It is very apparent. Here the secrecy implies that the ECI did not disclose, or rather it deliberately withheld crucial election data from the public at large. So this was the secret. The phrase kicking the issue down the road implied in the passage means, what is the meaning of this following phrase? Is it taking immediate action on a problem? Definitely not. Is it dismissing an issue as unimportant? No. So, what is the correct answer between these two, B and C? Conducting thorough investigation? No. The correct answer is postponing or avoiding making a decision, which means kicking the issue down the road, kicking it for later part, for some other day. This is something you can use in a daily, day-to-day basis as well. If someone who procrastinates a lot, someone who does not confront a problem, then they are kicking the issue down the road. The passage suggests that the most credible way to address concerns about a sudden increase in voter turnout is granting unrestricted rights or access to CCTV footage of polling booths. This is the most credible way to address concerns about sudden increases. Now, there was a certain problem, right? In order to address that, there should be transparency according to the passage, and there should be a credible way to address it. Now, what is that most credible way in terms of the passage? It is to grant unrestricted rights. Even though you might think some other solution is the way, but according to the passage, the correct answer is this. Moving on. Question number 14. Based on the passage, which legal argument could be used to challenge the ECI's decision to restrict access to election records? Here, the correct answer is, I'm just waiting for you to type it out. What do you think is the correct answer? The correct answer is, the legal argument which is valid is the Right to Information Act ensures access to all the government documents. Here, in order to challenge the ECI's decision to restrict access, this can be used. Question number 15. What does the term high-handedness mean in the phrase police high-handedness, partisanship of local administration and voter suppression through various means? Read the question properly. Police high-handedness, partisanship of local administration and voter suppression. So these are all negative connotations, right? So what do you think is the correct answer? Obviously, because they are negative, it cannot be option B. This cannot be the government's role in monitoring fair elections. And these both are negative. But do you think it's lack of coordination? No, this is too vague a term or a justification. The correct meaning is an excessive and oppressive use of power, which means high-handedness. Right? Question number 16. If an activist were to file a petition in the Supreme Court against the new amendment, to conduct of election rules, which constitutional argument would likely be used? This is a hypothetical legal scenario. If you're a lawyer, if an activist was filing a petition in Supreme Court against the new amendment of this specific set of rules, what constitutional amendment would you suggest be used? What do you think? The correct answer is transparency in governance is a fundamental aspect of free and fair elections. This will most likely to give you your desired result in your argument or upper hand, that transparency in governance is very important and it's a fundamental aspect in the election procedure to ensure that a smooth election procedure is run and it's also fair. Now, moving on to the last set of questions for this specific paragraph. What is the main purpose of this passage? I'm sure you'll be able to solve it in no time. Is it to provide a neutral analysis of recent electoral changes? No. To highlight concerns about transparency of election procedures? Yes. You don't even need to look to different options, but for your peace of mind, we can. To argue in favor of stricter election? No. Nobody said that it should be stricter. It should be transparent. So, no. To suggest that electronic voting machines should be established? No. Or should be abolished. In no way is this something that is said in the passage. Next question. What does the phrase damaging its own credibility imply about the ECI? Damaging its own credibility. It means that the ECI has made decisions that raises doubt about its impartiality. Because ECI did not disclose the records, it was voluntarily, deliberately withholding the records and important information from the public. It damaged its own reputation. It tarnished its own reputation that it is impartial. So that is why you can relate this term about ECI. 19. If the Supreme Court were to review the ECI's amendment, which legal test would it likely to apply? Here the correct answer is whether the amendment is consistent with the principle of electoral democracy. It's not promoting higher voter turnout. It's not national security, and definitely it's not whether it violates constitutional right to equality. Here electoral democracy is the most essential importance and the most essential test that is to be conducted. Which of the following would be the most effective step for the ECI to regain public trust? What do you think is the most effective step? If it was up to you, what would you do? The correct answer would be implementing complete secrecy in election processes. I'm just kidding. This is not the correct answer. If you think this was the correct answer, then I'm sorry to say you need to go back and you need to rewatch the video, because obviously the correct answer is strengthening independent monitoring of elections while ensuring voter privacy. There has to be a balance of voter privacy as well, and also there should be independent monitoring of elections. There should be no impartiality, right? So this is the correct answer, option number C. Now that we have solved 20 questions till now, and you have seen different kinds of not only questions but also concepts that you will be tested on, I hope you know how to study further, how to prepare your strategy for CLAT. And if you have any doubts, I hope you know that you can ask me questions anytime in the comment box. I'll be sure to address them. And if you would like to see more videos on different topics, please let us know. For now, election laws is a crucial point in terms of legal perspective as well, and in case of political science and law as well, because this is the founding stone of democracy, and it is the stone on which our future lies. So do not take it lightly. It is not only important from an academic perspective but also your personal information perspective. That is all for today. Have a great day. Goodbye.